Hey friends, Steven here, back with another video courtesy of the fine folks at zounds.com. That's ZOUNDS. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's talk about what's going to happen in this video as well as the subsequent video. That's right, it's a two-parter, and we're jumping into it right now. Today, we are going to compare two 7-string offerings from Jackson. The first one being the cheapest one they make, and the second one being one of the more pro tier and high-end options they offer. Both 7 strings, both 26.5-inch scale. But let's get into all of that individually, and then I'm going to do some blind comparisons so you can decide for yourself which one sounds better. Does it even matter how much they cost? Does the cost actually affect the sound in a positive or negative way? We're going to determine that, and then I'll have a second video where I tell you which is which, and we get into a little bit more detail about kind of my feelings on that topic. More so just to kind of put some perspective out there. Let's check out these guitars. All right, so we're going to kick it off with the cheaper of the two, which is this jam right here. This is a Dinky model from the fine folks at Jackson. This is a JSDK. It is the JS227 DKA HT. You probably saw an edit there because I couldn't get the whole name out of my brain for some reason. So I had to do it in 2 parts. Not that smart. Either way, moving on. Let's talk a little bit about this jam. First and foremost, this guitar starts at $199. So this whole thing, $199. I found some coupon codes which took it below $199. You can get it at Zounds. Links will be below if you're interested. And once you hear the specs, you might say to yourself, $199 is not that bad for all of that, especially once you hear it. But we'll get to that. Either way, I purchased this one myself, and Zounds sent me the other as part of this video for a comparison. So this is going to be a fun little thing that I keep on the channel. We're going to do more and more upgrades with it as time goes on, which will be a lot of fun. The body is the Dinky shape. If you're familiar with Jackson, Dinky is kind of their super strat mixed with an arch top type of thing. Really cool guitar. It's got these nice cutaways, which are universal between these two models. Just a fantastic aesthetic. It looks metal because, of course, it is matte black. And why wouldn't it be matte black? It's for chugging. It's for riffing. It needs to be black, and none blacker than matte black. And it's there. Now, it does do the thing. If you start to play it, it'll get shiny in the spots where your fingers hit, so on and so forth. But overall, it's a really nice finish. There'll be some beautiful B-roll for you to, kind of get a better look at it. And it doesn't say what the wood type is for the body on the description for Jackson. It doesn't say it on the description from Zounds, so I'm not certain. I assume it's one of the cheaper wood options, like poplar or something like that. It's probably a couple of pieces glued together. There is a seam you can see in the back, but that's under certain light. But I've also seen that on really expensive guitars, so neither here nor there. I don't think it really has much of a bearing on things. The electronics, in my opinion, have way more to do with the way the guitar sounds than the wood itself. It is a fairly heavy, dense feeling wood, so if that informs anything for you. We got ourselves a 26.5-inch scale neck, which means a slightly longer scale, and in turn, we get more string tension. So if we're tuning down to do things with a 7-string, which is what you're doing with a 7-string, right? You can chug, you can sludge, you can riff, you can lick. All these things sound suggestive, but they aren't. Maybe they are. Maybe they are. You can tune lower. That's the idea, right? Unless you're one of the weirdos that puts a higher string on a 7-string rather than the lower string. I don't know of any of those weirdos personally, but I'm sure it exists out there, and I've definitely seen a few videos of people doing it. Or you're someone like Wes Borland that had a really poor endorsement situation with Ibanez, who forced him to play 7-strings, even though he didn't like playing 7-strings and didn't use them in the facet that you would use a 7-string. So there's that, but this is not that situation. Also, Wes Borland, Jackson endorsee. So putting it back to the specs here. So the fretboard itself is Amaranth, which is a wood I'm not terribly familiar with. I've had no experience with it. I'm not one of these people that gets hung up on wood types, as I just mentioned a few seconds ago. I don't think that actually has that much bearing on the sound of a guitar. I think it can have some bearing on the resonance, especially when you're talking about a solid body. but I don't think that it has any effect on, or resonance and sustain. I don't think it has any effect as far as if you were to change this out and put these pickups in a different body that was made of a different wood, it's probably not going to sound that different because the pickups are doing most of the work. I know people are going to argue with me in the comments. That's just my perspective of it. Feel free to disagree. That's what a comment section's for, right? Having a great time or tearing people to shreds. And you could do either of those things. It comes with these cool piranha teeth inlays, which are actually pretty unique. You know, considering it's a $200 instrument, that's a pretty cool little feature and a real unique looking thing to have. It has a truss rod that is dual, and you can access it at the headstock, which is a great plus because sometimes on cheaper guitars, you got to take the whole neck off and make the adjustment at the heel, and that is a real pain in the ass. But you won't have to do that with this one. It also features a 12-inch to 16-inch radius, so it's a compound radius. Again, a high spec thing for a fairly inexpensive instrument. So just speaking of the neck alone, you're already kind of at the $200 mark because of just the specs. So we have got the 26.5-inch scale, which is an odd scale that is not typically common. It's becoming more common with 7 strings these days, but there was a point in time where it was not common at all. Continuing with the neck, we have a nut, which is made of plastic. You should expect a plastic nut on a guitar that is less than $200. And this one does not disappoint, or disappoints, however you want to look at it, by having a plastic nut. I did have to do some things to that, but we'll cover that in just a moment. We've got Jackson tuning keys, and that's it. There's not a lot of information on that. This guitar is made in China, and I know that that makes certain people upset. I don't care where a guitar is made, as long as it's nice. It's all wood and wire, and with a good setup, any of them should be fantastic. Let's move on to the pickups and hardware. So pickups, we got Jackson high output humbuckers. That's just what they call them, and that's what they are. They're a high output humbucker. They're fairly bright, fairly mid-heavy, mid-forward, I suppose. They sound great, especially if you're tuning low, and that's the goal of a 7-string, tuning low. We've got a master volume and a tone. We've got a 3-way selector switch, so you've got some tonal variety there, and some not bound sounding pickups, which is pretty cool. The bridge is a Jackson bridge, doesn't give much spec on that, and that's kind of it as far as the specs go. It's a pretty straightforward thing that is inexpensive, and you probably don't expect a ton of spec detail and things of that nature for this price. But I have to say, I feel like you're already getting something that is worth messing with, and a tool that is capable of being upgraded and changed over time to be exactly what you want it to be, or just a completely different machine by the end of all of the modifications you could do to this thing. So I do want to talk to you a bit about what I had to do to this guitar to make it playable. When I got it out of the box, insert footage of me using the time-lapse feature here on the iPhone in order to make it look like I was doing something really fast that I was actually doing very awkwardly and slow, and cussing. There was a lot of cursing to myself privately in this room. Cursing. Can you imagine? Anyway, after I got through all of that and the shame that was struggling to open a box as an adult man, I got the guitar out and I set it here on this bench, and discovered that it wasn't in the greatest shape. It had a very poor setup, which, I mean, what do you expect? It's less than $200. Intonation was all out of whack. The strings that were on it were claimed to be 9 to 52. They seemed a little smaller than that, but maybe I'm just used to playing gigantic strings, and all strings that are smaller than what I use feel tiny, because they do. Either way, it did require some changes. Now, the nut slots were cut a little too low, so I had to fill some of those back in with a compound and basically sand them down to the appropriate width so that they would sit properly with the string. Once I did that and got the intonation set up, I noticed that there were some issues with some dead frets, as well as the tension feeling a little weird. So I took the neck off, I applied a shim, kind of straightened some things out there, used the truss rod and adjusted things. There was initially a lot of fret buzz at the first fret, and I was able to eliminate that after applying the shim, and then did a full setup once more and went over the edge of this to see if there were any sharp frets. There were a few down here in this area that were a little sharp and pokey. Now, I don't know if that was just from manufacturer flaw or laziness, or if it was just from sitting in a warehouse and weather changing. It could be any of those things. So I don't really hold that against it because I've gotten expensive guitars that have sharp frets. So I did file that down a bit and then got it all set up. Currently, there is a 68 on the lowest string and a 9 on the highest string. It is currently set up in drop G, which is cool. It's fun to play with because of the 26.5-inch scale. It makes it a lot of fun, and it stays in tune, and it kind of stays punchy and articulate, which you wouldn't get out of something that was 25.5 or even lesser than that. There'll be more of a bassy and kind of thuddy quality to that. As the neck gets longer, it becomes a little brighter, and it's just how it works. Other than that, it's perfectly usable, but you're going to want to hear it, and I can't let you do that, because I'm going to talk to you about the other guitar, and then we're going to do a blind comparison at the end of this video, so you will technically hear it, but you won't know whether you're hearing it. And then the next video, I'll follow up by telling you which is which. So let's move on to the other guitar. All right, I'm back, and well, we're in a higher tax bracket. We went from $199 to $1699. This is the Jackson Pro Dinky Modern EverTune 7 Prime. That is the full name in the description, and that is what I said. It was actually easier to get out of my mouth than the make and model for the other one, which I've completely blanked on, so I won't be saying it again, because there's no point in just saying things that are nonsense, right? Although that's most of what my channel is. Nonsense. Either way, start off with things that are similar between the two: 26.5-inch scale neck, dinky body style, and same headstock. That's about where it ends, actually. There'll be other similarities, but the ones that are actually of note are the more obvious aesthetic features. But getting into the body, we've got the same dinky arch top thing going on as the prior model in the cheaper price range. The biggest difference, though, is that this one has a more defined arch, and these cuts are much more defined, and they are much more comfortable when you're playing the instrument. The finish is matte gray. I love matte gray. I've seen a few other YouTubers complain about this guitar being boring and aesthetic. I think it's actually pretty beautiful. The other cool thing about gray is that when you are under certain elements of lighting, gray kind of soaks that in a bit, which is really cool. So I think it's a beautiful thing. But yeah, satin finish again, not black. We're doing with gray. And we have a basswood body in comparison to the unidentified wood on the other. We're going to get into the neck now. So as I mentioned previously, it's a 26.5-inch scale neck, similar to the inexpensive model. It has an ebony fretboard versus amaranth. So we have real ebony on this one. We have a 3-piece maple neck as opposed to maple wingate and maple neck. So a 3-piece in comparison to the 1-piece maple. So we've got maple, wingate, whinge, however you say it. I know people probably don't care how you say it, but some of you might. And if you do, I might say it wrong, I might say it right, who knows. Another maple. So a little more stability there. This is a graphite reinforced neck as well. So that is going to add to your tuning stability and your ability to set the guitar up as far as the truss rod goes. Speaking of the truss rod, we have heel joint access to the truss rod, which makes making adjustments much easier. We're dealing with a Graphtec nut, which is a fantastic upgrade. We've got Goto locking tuners, which I'll get some nice B-roll of as well. So that's a high-end spec that is a significant leap from the other guitar. We've got some nice black binding, which I'll also get some great shots of on the headstock, which really makes things pop. It's a unique character thing we've got going on there. Yeah, 12 to 16-inch compound radius, also quite similar to the cheaper model. So that's cool. You've got that extended range to make things a little better with the tension on lower tunings. So let's move on to the hardware. We're starting it off with this EverTune black 7-string bridge. It's an EverTune. It's designed to keep your guitar in tune. Once you set it up and go back and forth with it a bit, you will really not have to tune it too often. And that's really cool, especially when you're dealing with really low tunings. Not having to deal with tuning is going to be a lifesaver for you. In addition to that, we have some Fishman Fluence Classic open cores. So these are the classic ones, not the modern. They are more of a classic PAF vibe or your classic humbucker sound. These are a slightly lower output type of vibe from the Fishman Fluence Moderns. So if you're used to the Fishman Fluence Moderns or you've heard those, these do not sound the same. These are a little more, in my mind, in my opinion at least, I actually kind of prefer these because they get me closer to a passive humbucker sound, but also with less of that compression thing that happens with active pickups, particularly with the moderns. And you just get a little bit more clarity to me. And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not someone who uses a ton of gain on even stuff that sounds gainy of my recordings. It's really not. Typically the gain on amps for me is at about like 3.5 to 4, occasionally maybe a 5 if it's an amp that needs a little more oomph. So something that's a little more in this world is better for me because it creates a more dynamic experience with my playing between the modeler or an amp and the pickup itself. So that's really cool. Gets you back into that kind of traditional territory if you're someone who loves classic humbucker sounds, but also kind of wants the added consistency of a preamp. Fishmans are weird because people automatically kind of go out of their way to compare them to EMGs because they're active. They are not similar to EMGs other than they take a battery. Beyond that, the entire design premise is very different and they don't sound similar at all. If you actually A/B them, they're very different, especially at lower gain settings. You can really tell the difference, but that's not what this video is about. We've got master volume, master tone with the push-pull to get those voicings here. We have a 5-way selector switch, which is going to give you a ton of tonal variety. I think it's one thing that really shines on this guitar because of the pickups. You have so many sounds you can get out of them, and because they are active, when you're switching to something like a setting that is, like, say, out of phase, or something that's kind of running a little bit of each pickup or something in parallel type of thing, you're not losing volume as you're doing that. So you're still getting the same clarity and upfront nature that an active would offer, but you're also getting all the tonal variety of a passive pickup. This got a nice setup here on the back. Obviously we've got bolt-on construction, similar to the inexpensive one. We have the back for the EverTune, which is a quite large thing, but that's to be expected. Our battery pack, control panel, and that's pretty much it. It's a great guitar that has some pretty cool specs. Some additional things of note, since I did mention it on the prior guitar. Out of the box, this one was set up pretty bad, actually. The guitar in the cheaper price range was much easier to get going than this one because this was a B stock, so someone had purchased it and returned it. Now, my assumption, and I may be wrong, is that they got it and didn't really know how to deal with the EverTune, and they got frustrated and sent it back. I say that because the guitar's first 6 strings were set up in E standard. I'm not sure what that was all about. It was a real struggle going from that to drop G, which is what this is in currently, because I wanted to match the other guitar for the demos. And yeah, it took some work. EverTunes are kind of tricky. I didn't really film that because I feel like there's plenty of videos out there of explaining how an EverTune works and how to fight with one in order to get it to work. I have to shout out Nick Hill from Nick Hill Makes Music here on YouTube because he is very familiar with EverTunes, and I was able to call him and get some direction on how to correct some of the things that were wrong due to the prior setup, because getting into the proper zones with the EverTune was becoming a pretty big struggle due to how it was set up previously. So just putting that out there, if you're getting an open box or a restock item, there is a possibility there may be some issues with it because sometimes people just don't know what they're doing. And that clearly seemed to be the situation with this. But since I've set it up and got it restrung and everything's dialed in now, it's a pretty flawless instrument that stays in tune. So let's head on over to some black screens with A's and B's on them, and you're going to hear some audio, and then you get to tell me which you think is which.